very much, and a very good late morning to all of you, and we really appreciate you being here on a Saturday. So there are the two of us, Fedor, who is the head of our Ukrainian office, will be presenting most of the staff, and I'll try to explain the table with some results, which is a small part but very important. So without further ado, I'm passing the microphone to Fedor, and he'll lead you through the experiment we carried out and some practical recommendations we have for you.
Thank you, Leonid. Good morning, everyone. So today we'll talk about machine translation deployment and some best practices at our company. Just a moment. From concept to industrial application. Since the time the first machine translation system was introduced in 1954, there have been fantastic changes. The first machine translation system, called IBM Mark II, was introduced in New York City. It was designed to translate from Russian into English. It had a dictionary of 250 words and 6 grammatical rules. The first generation of rule-based machine translation systems was complemented by a statistical machine translation based on the analysis of bilingual corpora. Finally, now we are witnessing the active evolution of neural MT systems, which appeared in 2016. If earlier the use of MT was often perceived almost like cheating and was strictly forbidden by both direct clients and large language service providers or LSPs, and it is understandable why, due to substandard quality. Now we are more surprised when it is not used. The purpose of this presentation is to give a brief overview of our experience and recommendations, which can be useful both for translation agencies and freelance translators. We want to share some knowledge with those who are not using machine translation in their work yet, and also explain available scenarios for those who do not yet understand why clients suddenly started to push machine translation and demand you to lower your rates. Let's look at the industry evolution. Active machine translation deployment by both big direct clients and multilingual translation vendors in most areas that are not related to creative translation was caused by many factors. Among them are price pressure, competition, development of cloud-based CAT tools, and online marketplaces like Prozee and TC, widespread use of machine translation, often covered, and related price dumping. For projects with millions of words, many clients will appreciate an RFP proposal that would cut their translation costs significantly with only a slight decrease in quality. That's why suppliers of large LSPs should be prepared for such a change and expect to be asked to reduce their rates in response to increased productivity. For texts intended for internal use or for large volumes of technical data, for example, software help, it's typical to use machine translation, pre-translation with minimal editing. For texts where quality requirements, including style, remain high, the following approach prevails. The customer enables machine translation on their side and informs about this. Suppliers start to get MT suggestions along with translation memory matches in their CAT systems. After a certain period, usually 2 or 3 months, the client analyzes the difference between edited output and raw MT. Various methods are used. They can include automated MT quality evaluation methods like LEPOR, BLUE, or simply calculating editing distance. In our opinion, the most objective evaluation is based on counting not editing distance, but actual MT editing time. We will get to this a bit later. So after the initial evaluation, the vendor is informed that MT has proved its efficiency, even if it is not actually so, and the vendor actively protests. And the vendor needs to agree to apply MT-related discounts. I'll explain this a bit later too. Later also we'll talk about ways to achieve a certain level of client-vendor understanding when it comes to MT deployment. Let's talk about pros and cons. Considering the low price of most popular MT engines and the possibility to deploy it immediately, there are not so many cons. Some linguists are unable to work responsibly with machine translation. They often frequently miss semantic mistakes or typical MT blunders like mixing card map, sentence suggestion, language pair or couple, etc. The other important thing is to take into account data privacy and GDPR. Some customers demand that their data do not leave the vendor's office, network, or even country. This should be also kept in mind. In June 2019, we conducted an experiment. We selected a 5,000 word text on IT security and translated this text using both a human and multiple MT engines. Then we compared both performance and output quality of the target text using different methods. Each of the 5 participants translated one fragment, 1,000 words on their own, and then post-edited 3 other fragments, each translated by a different MT engine. This experiment simulated the work of a real team that comprises linguists with varying levels of experience and productivity. You can see average performance figures in the table. Surely skeptics will say, great, the productivity is high, but the output will inevitably produce some trash or at least a substandard target text. So, is there a way to guarantee objectivity when it comes to productivity increase or MT quality? Can we truly compare apples to apples in this case? And the answer is positive. Let's move on to the next slide that deals with the evaluation of translation quality. There are different methods of assessing the MT output quality listed on this slide. Theoretically, it is possible that the final text, post-edited text, has 19% in common with MT output, but these remaining 10% took an enormous amount of time due to distortions introduced by machine translation. Alternatively, the similarity between edited and raw MT can be limited, but editing time proved to be minimal. There is a serious problem with machine translation pre-translated documents that big MLVs send to vendors and require a significant discount, usually up to 30 or 50%. The translator has no incentive or motivation to spend a lot of time on such a text, and only introduces minimal and critical corrections. making the text barely readable. But when the complaints about the terrible quality of machine translation are not accepted because they objectively measured editing distance between MT output and the text returned by the vendor is minimal. In this case, we are simply not comparing apples to apples, using the mediocre result as a reference. In order to produce a truly quality output, one may need to discard machine translation whatsoever or rework it significantly, spending substantial time. Now I will ask Leonid to explain the following table. Leonid?
Okay, it looks a little bit complicated, but I'll try to explain it, and I'm going to dedicate some time to the table. Okay, so first of all, what you see there on the left-hand side is reference human translation and 3 empty engine outputs. And I'll just remind you the experiment setup. First of all quality evaluations were done blindly. The reviewers did not know what are they reviewing, of course, whether it's human. I mean, human was just empty something, say MT4. Second, they didn't know the name of the engine, of course, because everything was blind. And finally, we did multiple measurements, including several methods of comparison. I'll talk about it later, but most importantly, we measured both the quality of raw machine translation output and we measured quality of edited machine translation output. The question is why? Why do we need it? The reason is very simple. Just like Fedor said for the comment in the previous slide, we need to compare apples to apples if we need to judge productivity objectively. If we compare junk empty edited output to, say, relatively acceptable or good human translation, it's not a scientific experiment. It's just some babble. But this table exactly tells you that in this particular case, the experiment was objective. Why? Anybody has got any guesses? Or it's just too far from you and you do not see? Okay. So first of all, let's look on the right-hand side. Oh, red is not so good here, but you can see where anything is in red, it's the red zone. It's bad or terrible. So the thing is, after blind evaluation, and I'll just remind you that what we had were multiple people, each of them translated in person one piece of the text, about 1,000 words, then translated 3 other pieces, 1,000 words each, for each of the engines, but these were different pieces, so there are no correlations. Finally, this person does a QA on all the output on the 5th piece that this person has never, ever touched. So this was objective. No correlations, no errors, nothing like that. So first of all, raw empty. On the right-hand side, you see 2 columns. The rightmost one is LQA atomistic score. That is when we look at particular translation units, segments, and see where we have grammar errors, syntax errors, country standards, whatever else. Dual spaces, broken tags, everything like that, at the atomistic level, that is unit by unit. The column to the left are holistic criteria. Holistic criteria, they define the overall perception of the text as a whole, say 1,000 words. It's a contiguous text, so you can make holistic assessments. And there are 2 assessments there. One is holistic intelligibility or readability. That is, how easy is it to perceive and read the text? If you need to read it 3 times in order to understand it, it's wrong. It means that its readability is pretty mediocre at best. Adequacy means how well the translation reflects the original meaning and message of the source text. So these are holistic evaluations, because even if the text contains some minor errors in particular sentences, generally you can still reconstruct the overall meaning of the text pretty well if it's generally what we say holistically good. So the thing is, what you may notice immediately is that both neural machine translation engines actually produce relatively good holistic results, actually similar to human translation. And once again, we didn't try to create the best human translation in the world. Our goal was to reproduce a real experiment. Moreover, as Claire will probably confirm, clients do not need perfect quality. They need good quality within the budget and on time. But what's most important, they need reliably good quality that should be good in 99.9% of the cases, which is the most important thing here. Great. So then we post-edited them. And as I said, every post-editing was independent, and we emulated the activity of a real team, in this case, that comprised 5 different people with different levels of experience. I mean, none of them were novices, but all of them were different and with different speeds. I mean, in reality, their translation or editing speeds varied by, and the difference was by a factor of 2 actually. So we are averaging results to produce kind of a reliable, trustworthy estimate, not just using one particular person who could be editing very quickly. So there, we've got the result improvement. So first of all, editing does improve results. All the atomistic evaluations are very similar here. You see it's in the middle and with a dark green background. So they are somewhere between 60-something and 75%, 75% for human translation, but above 60 is typically good enough. It means that it's not perfect, but it's generally good for consumption, let's put it that way. The interesting thing is that while for neural engines, holistic factors hardly improved at all, they are more or less similar. There was a dramatic improvement, very serious improvement. We moved from the red zone for the statistical MT engine, and that was put here for a purpose. So generally what you can say here is first, of course, well, we know that NMT engines provide a much smoother translation. Hence, we have a much better holistic evaluation factors and scores. And this is the great differentiator because holistic evaluations are obtained very quickly. And generally, using the score, you can immediately guess whether it's a statistical or a neural engine or just a bad translator. The second thing is that even despite the fact that holistic factors are pretty good for neural engines, their atomistic scores, that is segment-based weighted scores for errors, are terrible in all cases, for all of them. That is, they cannot be used as final output if you need not just something that's readable, but if you need quality output, you still need to edit them. And that's very important, and Fedor will talk more about it later. Finally, the most important thing for us, because for the edited texts, both atomistic scores and holistic scores are very similar, both among themselves and similar to the human translation. It means that our speed evaluations are reliable. We're comparing apples to apples. We're comparing text that are really have a similar quality. And once again, it's a real life situation. It's not a perfect text. It's just a good text. Okay, passing the mic back to Fedor.
Thank you, Leonid. Let's move on to selecting the best machine translation engines for your projects. I would like to know that this is applicable for untrained engines available out of the box. Nowadays, machine translation engines are developing at such a pace that information becomes outdated sometimes even before the publication. So I highly recommend you all to subscribe to Intento. There is great resource, Intento News and reports to get the most recent market info and the high-level picture. For example, the June Intento report shows what engines have worked best for particular language pairs and how the picture looked like a few months ago. You will actually save a lot of time. For English into Russian or Ukrainian and the other way around, we most often use DeepL and Google Neural in combination with Google SMT. Prior to that, Amazon was among the leaders, but as I already mentioned, the situation is changing very dynamically. Let's move on. Interesting question. Why use a combination of engines instead of simply selecting the best one in performing pre-translation? Our experience shows that the translator responsibility and attention factor is the key here. Before you insert an MT suggestion, you need to read it. You need to check if some parts of it are not suitable or plain wrong, which happens all too often with neural MT. The text is fluent, it's great, but it's not correct at all. When you provide multiple suggestions, the attention level increases automatically. You try to look carefully at available options and select the most appropriate one. On the other hand, once the text was pre-translated, it is much easier to overlook even real blunders. Do not forget about matches from translation memories. They may prove more useful than machine translation output if they are available. For instance, high fuzzy matches are typically way more relevant than machine translation suggestions. So let's move on to how start using the machine translation. You can work with machine translation in a variety of ways, from trivial copy-pasting from Google Translate or its equivalent to the correct process in a CloudCat tool or desktop tool. When the handoff format can be imported and then exported back without the need for a server translation memory or term base, we recommend you using a CloudCat solution. All you need is a browser and internet access. For example, in SmartCat, you can purchase a certain number of machine translation pages which are good for any of the engines available through the system. Then you enable only the ones you want. Always remember that free versions of MT engines are not suitable for confidential data. Translators do not need to obtain or purchase software or MT licenses. With a corporate subscription, your team gets as many internal accounts as you need, correct? Great. If you don't have linguists available for a particular task, you can find them on the marketplace or publish the job on the bulletin board. To know more about great CloudCat tool SmartCat, you can find Igor and ask him. Yes, you owe me now. Let's move on. So, selecting the CAT tool dealing with desktop. If you need to stick to a particular CAT, especially a desktop edition, this slide is for you. Pros. There is a community developed plugin, it's called MT Comparison, that allows you to pre-translate text using multiple engines and then export it to an Excel table, where you can select the one best suited for the whole project. And cons. You cannot control MT usage anymore. You cannot even check the extent to which MT was used. Thanks to the SDL community, there is a plugin for traders called Anonymizer that allows translators to remove the AT status and replace it with interactive or copied from source. Sorry, I really think it's equivalent to cheating, because if you use MT and you hide it, it's really cheating. The conclusion is obvious. If your suppliers use MT to boost productivity, deploy it yourself and do it openly. using only private and pre-selected MT engine or engines. Save time and money and don't risk compromising your client's data or violating your NDAs because freelancers tend to use free engines. Let's move on. Do you need your own custom machine translation engine? It's almost always necessary to follow client's terminology or industry standard terminology. Of course, you would like to train the MT engine so that it would use correct terminology and approve translations of standard phrases. In other words, it sounds great to have an MT engine tailored for your texts. Unfortunately, it's not that easy or cheap. In our opinion, a glossary accessible via the Google Translation API should be sufficient for everyday tasks of a typical translation company. This feature is a recent addition, and we are going to test it extensively in the nearest future. The good news is you can build your own neural MT engine, and you can even do it using open source engine like Modern MT. Or you can purchase a customized solution from a third party. And the bad news is you need a huge corpus for training the neural machine translation engine, about 1 million quality units. To train the general MT engine, you will need about 10,000 translation units minimum. Otherwise, you will get garbage in and garbage out. So if you do not have extensive translation memories, perhaps it's better to use built-in glossary checks in your CAT tool and save time. Let's move on to working with existing clients. Now that we have discussed possible benefits of using machine translation, we need to understand how to deliver this message to your clients, or should it be done at all? Or maybe it's easier to quietly deploy it on your end and keep the extra profit. The question is quite challenging. Let's consider the options. Decline to deploy MT. You might think we are paid good money and required to produce quality work, not some crappy machine translation. Potential consequences. Sooner or later, your client will receive offers from your competitors who use MT by default and do not advertise it. These offers will use significantly lower rates. You will either have to use MT anyway, or lose your client, or explain and prove that MT is not applicable for these texts, and the client is dealing with competitors who are not fully transparent about their tools and processes. Next option, quiet deployment. You deploy MT, get additional profits, and everything is fine. You get extra money. Then the client gets a competitor's offer and asks you, can you do that? If you answer that your prices are already MT-based, it can lead to a conflict because the client originally ordered translation, not MTPE or machine translation post-editing. At a certain moment, the client should be made aware that you are using machine translation and that there may be occasional errors. That's the reason why the price is lower compared to human translation. And at best, you will just have to lower the rates. The right approach, in our opinion, is to start with an experiment on actual texts using MT in private mode. Do not use free online services. Do not compromise your client's data. If you see that MT use can increase productivity, it's worthwhile to talk to the client and offer reasonable discounts, depending on the productivity increase. Then you need to extend this approach to all vendors. We will discuss this a bit later. Yes, you will make less profit, but you will have more time and free resources thanks to increased productivity, so you can take more work and eventually earn more. If MT only works for a certain share of clients' texts, it makes sense to offer multiple options for large projects, both with and without machine translation. Advantages. Increased client loyalty. Even if the client refuses to use machine translation, it is their decision. They will be aware of this possibility, understand why they receive offers from your competitors with lower prices, and what are the consequences. Cons. It will take some time to find new clients to utilize freed resources. You may need to look for new translators, editors, if the existing ones are not ready for change. The use of machine translation implies a high level of attention and responsibility. Not all translators, editors who declare their readiness for machine translation post-editing or MTPE are actually ready for it. A lot of people miss semantic blunders, actually. Now let's talk about working with the new clients. With the new clients, you can gain a competitive advantage by deploying machine translation after testing it on clients' sample texts. Unless, of course, there is a strict clause somewhere related to MT use. In other words, it's strictly forbidden. Most clients, like Claire just confirmed yesterday, actually don't care how you translate as long as you're able to provide near human quality level. As long as you provide quality, it doesn't matter how you do it. Do not also forget to explain the benefits of working with CAT tools, because some clients haven't heard about them, and discounts for fuzzy matches and repetitions. Explain that during translation, the translator receives suggestions from various sources, including translation memory, term base, private MT engines, because your data is safe and will not be used to train publicly available MTs. But only the translator or editor decides which suggestion to use, and the result does not suffer under most circumstances. Now let's talk about dealing with your suppliers. First of all, you should clearly convey the news. Explain planning and scheduling for the MTP transition. Next, set up a break-in period with no discounts and with same output quality requirements. Then you need to figure out the best engine, evaluate productivity gains, and set discount targets and conduct negotiations. You need to be vigilant of quality at all times. MTP process requires elevated level of responsibility and attention. MT discount targets. This is quite simple. Assuming you evaluated MT productivity gains, you need to apply different client and supplier side discounts. This depends on your rate markups. If it's big, you can skip applying discounts for suppliers. And if it's small, you need to apply supplier side discounts to keep your margins. Please look at the table. We have 4 categories of MT, if I can say, usefulness with different productivity gain. If productivity gain is below 10%, we suggest you not to apply any discount for suppliers and use it only in-house to avoid bad quality. Of course, there should not be any discount for the client. And if MT provides great productivity increase, You can suggest about 20% discount for your client and respectively about 40% supplier for your vendor. That's all, actually. I hope it was interesting. The last slide is about potential issues. Just a moment. That's not all. Okay.
I'm afraid it's not the last one.
We'll talk about. Okay. We'll talk about potential issues with MT deployment. Let's talk about deployment in your own company. Sometimes your personnel just does not have motivation for the changes. Why do we need it? Everything works fine without it. What should you do? You should explain that the old way cannot go on forever. The transition is really inevitable, just like transition to CAD tools 20 years ago. Otherwise, we'll be sooner or later sidelined by competition. If some of employees are resisting the transition, you can move them to other project lines where MT doesn't work and provide some bonuses for those who are willing and ready to embrace new technology. One more possible issue is insufficient attention to quality. I've talked about it a bit earlier. MTP requires reinforced control over quality. Otherwise, all MT-specific errors will stay in final texts, like compromise, meaning zlom, compromise, like translation of karta as a map. Actually, it's ban card. You will need to drop or do not use individuals who show lax attitude or are not attentive enough. This actually is a bonus slide. Here are our best practices. So first, use Cloud CAD tools with a selection of integrated engines. Use MT plugin from Intento for desktop CAD tools. Follow the news. The situation is actually very, very dynamic. Functions you miss so much can be added tomorrow or even today. They may be added as we speak. Reevaluate MT productivity on a regular basis and work with your clients. Explain why your competitors' offerings may be so much lower. Provide real choice and clarify options and details. That's really the last slide.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much once indeed for your patience. And you are very welcome with whatever questions or opinions you have.
In Russian, in English, okay, you're free to choose any language.
I have a question. How do you know the productivity gain before you start working with the client? I mean, if they come to you, they're okay, please use neural machine translation, give us the discount, but you have not started to check. You do not know what it will come out. How do you give the discount before knowing the reality, the productivity gain?
I will answer this question. Thank you. That's very interesting. Actually, we always ask for a sample text. We do pre-translate, evaluate MT on a reasonable fragment, about 500 words. And this work will later be reused as a translation memory. We always test different engines before on a sample text, and then only then we can provide with for example, selected discount size. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank you for the presentation. Actually, this is one of the best I have visited. This UTIC, yes, really, very useful. And the question is the following. Usually the major huge players at the market, they have rules and recommendations about PEMT, post-machine translation editing. And there they describe the expectation. And practically all great players say, big players, say that we understand that still machine translates differently from human translation. And still they presuppose that there is some, how to call it, you feel that this is the translation done by the machine and edited by a human being. But still, this is the stumble point or stone that although they put it in their instructions and requirements that we accept that this is not a human translation, this is still a machine translation edited by a human being. There are questions. How do you deal if you have experience with them? How do you prove that still it's not human translation? And the reader will, in the long run, will feel that it's edited machine translation, not human translation. If you have the experience, that would be great to hear. Thank you.
Yes, we do have experience. Leonid wants to ask to answer this question, please.
Yeah, as soon as it comes to political questions, and it's a highly political one, actually, it has nothing to do with technology.
Right.
Yeah. So first of all, okay, it may sound blasphemous, but actually, in most cases, this is fine. Because when you come to think of that, you are reading an instruction manual, or you're reading some guidelines, or you're just reading information on the city you're visiting, and you want to figure out the most interesting landmarks. Okay, it will not sound natural in your language. Fine. But as far as the message and the meaning have been conveyed, and generally you can read it easily, you do not need to read it 3 times to figure out what they wanted to say, you are good. Okay, it doesn't look so nice. You feel that it's not human. So what? I mean, of course, to a translator who's been doing this for years, it sounds terrible. But let's be pragmatic here. Our clients, our consumers, they have a certain level of expectation. And this level of expectations is well below perfect. It's at the good level. And good means I'm visiting Dnipro. Personally, I haven't been here for the last 30 years. Okay, so I want to read about the major landmarks, places I need to visit. So I need to go to Hortitsa, or I need to go somewhere. Okay, it would be readable. It would be understandable. I'll be able to go there. I'll be able to put those pins on my GPS map. I'm good. I'll not be fully satisfied. There will be no aesthetic satisfaction, but we'll deal with that.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are 2 areas, and that's why I'm answering in such detail. There are 2 areas. First of all, there are areas where you need perfection.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's artistic translation, and do not underestimate the volume of it. Computer games,
Yes.
big screen movies, books, and all the other stuff. They really need to be translated very well. If you just have a kind of a machine interpreted thing that generally gives you the idea, I'm afraid it's not Shakespeare. It's Britney Spears. So that's one area where you'll still need to get to perfection. Whether you start with a certain level of machine engine, but you'll need to dedicate more attention to details and to polishing it to perfection. And there is another area here where nobody cares. Actually, like knowledge bases, Q&As, where volumes are huge. And even if it's not too understandable, nobody cares.
Yeah.
So generally, let's be realistic here and understand and fine-tune our expectations. And it also relates to the professional aspirations and the ways moving forward for translators. Once again, translators will not disappear. Translators are not becoming endangered species. You are not going to become extinct. But you'll have to switch the mode. You need to adapt.
Yes.
And the other thing Fedor mentioned, and many other people mentioned, do not forget, NMT is very smooth, but this only hides egregious issues and errors with the text. Sometimes you read it, it kind of sounds good. Then you try to understand, and it suddenly turns out that it's complete rubbish. It's not adequate to the original text. So that's one of the areas where translators need to evolve. That is, they'll be translating much more, much cheaper, much faster. You will not earn less. You'll just need to do it differently. And do not forget that part of the economy in terms of productivity goes into more detailed, more in-depth, more attentive editing. Okay, hopefully I answered
great.
it.
Thank
I
you.
apologize for it being a very long reply.
No. It's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Сейчас я тогда после, хорошо? А можно, it's better for me to be in Russian, okay? Пожалуйста, можно на слайд?
Could you just switch to the slide with coefficients for clients and suppliers and translators? If I understand correctly, just provision of higher discounts for translators and to the clients that we need, that there are some costs for deployment of this new tools. But the question is, the packages that translators receive from you for post-editing, whether these packages include always pre-translated texts, and they don't need to do anything with payments for MT suppliers, or sometimes translators pay for MT, and it's not included in the packages. So actually, maybe I will start from the first question. Always we try to provide text without pre-translation, but the model of work just suggests that we don't include, but we do pre-translate by 3 different engines, but we don't include pre-translate into the target text. So the translator should look at these 3 options, read it, and choose the best one. So we hope that translator reads them and chooses the best one and just includes it into the target text. And we always pay for it. Never translator pays for pre-translation because we pay for it. We choose the engine, maybe by this vendor on the sample text. We don't need to have pre-translate by 3 different engines for the whole project. So we do it only for the sample text. As to the pre-translate, maybe I have answered. So do you provide an access to IP? No. In terms of CloudCat tool, the translator sees these options from different engines in the same panel with translation memory. So the translator could choose one of them, or just doesn't choose at all. So, and that's a great perspective and benefit, because if we use desktop cat tool, you should do pre-translate, or you should provide access to your IP key, and you don't want to do. So it could work with SmartCat, but it doesn't work with SDL Tradus. Yes, for sure, yes. Translator doesn't hear. Okay. So as to the question, discounts, it's not so much about deployment. It's much easier if, for example, client pays you 10% per word and you pay translator 5%. So if you do the same discount for everybody, you will just have a lack of figures, and you don't want to see this lack. So that's why discount for translator 40% is That's why usually leads to the client discount of 20%. We have formula for this calculation. I can't share it with you right now, but this formula is very clearly shows which discounts we use for such productivity gain in each category. Thank you.
Questions. The translation is a skill. Is a skill that has to be developed by a person for many years. I mean, if you want to become a translator, you have to train. You have to learn how to do it. You spend years to become qualified, and then a neural machine translation comes in. So you just apply these skills. You just make a little switch and work with that machine translation by using the skills that you acquired previously. The question, what happens with the next generation of the translators if they just do not have the environment to develop the skills because there is already it's already machine translated?
Let me answer this. I'm a driver, and I drive automated gearbox, and I cannot drive manual. I've forgotten this long ago, but still I can drive. And maybe Leonid.
But what if you did not learn? I mean,
I did.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great analogy, but I'll talk about an older one where this transition has already been completed years ago. My father was a professor at an architectural college. So at his time, it was typical that students need to know how to draw each of them by hand. So they were drawing Greek busts, they were copying classical pictures, and it was an inalienable skill. If you couldn't draw, you'll never become an architect. Even though architects, as you know, they are typically not exactly drawing, but it was considered an absolutely I would say for students, inevitable skill that you have to go through in order to become one. If you cannot draw, you're not an architect. Nowadays, I mean, I regret to inform you that most colleges, at least in the United States, they do not teach you how to draw. They're using programs. So now you have quite a number of architects who simply do not know how to do that. Have we lost some skills? Well, yeah, we did. I mean, prior to that, you could sketch on a napkin, and nowadays they cannot sketch on a napkin. They need a tablet. But I mean, in terms, there is an evolution of mankind. I cannot do many things that prehistorical people could do. I cannot kill game with a bow. I cannot do many things, and we still exist. So, I mean, it's a natural evolution. For some reason, translators perceive it as an extinction or existential threat. I do not think it's like that. But you can always hone your skills, because when you're converting, say, mediocre or mid-level machine translation and creating a marvel, say, in artistic text, it's also a skill, and it's a very human skill. So in a sense, as far as you need to improve it, as far as, say, the next generation comes, it's better. It's not perfect, and just at the opening ceremony, you remember Paul Filkin's speech. He said, and once again, he's an expert, he doesn't expect it in his lifetime that the machine will replace a human, and the same can be attributed to Don De Palma, an industry expert. So no, you'll have to hone your skills, you'll be more marginalized, but you'll be improving 10 times or maybe 100 times more text than you used to translate without tools. That's it. But that's natural evolution. Let's not cling to the manual gearbox or to the pencil and a piece of paper. Let's just move with a stream, in a sense. Okay, sorry if it sounded too long or just too philosophical.
Добрый день. Hello. In Russian, if I may, I am curious in quality assessment, how you assess the end product that you get when you use machine translation, meaning to what extent and whether the criteria are different when you evaluate the human translation as compared to the machine translation. Excellent question. This is a question for me. We are having another speech at 2:30 in the business track, right in front of the canteen. And there we will talk about the real life quality metrics. So if you are interested in learning more about it, you are welcome to join. And right now I will tell you briefly, and here's the answer. I'm afraid there are a lot of myths in the industry today. Different people say different people are talking about different metrics. And I say that we should measure the quality just the same as you measure the quality in any other instances. Any other instance, you use the same ruler, you use the same criteria. What you change is the tolerance level. If we're talking about regular scale from 0 to 9 for a human translation, and you as a client say, I need you, human, to give me an 8 at least. But if we're talking about a machine, that would be an okay translation. So the measurement, my answer is the measurement is always the same. We use the same quality standards. Different is the level of tolerance. And I would say that this is the only normal approach, because there is no scientist or an engineer who would somehow adjust your scale to your specific, say, machine pressure. Okay, thank you. Okay, just maybe a final question before we wrap up.
To ethics, you mentioned that you should tell to the client that you are using machine translation. But at the same time, you mentioned that the clients do not care what you're using as long as the result is good and as long as you keep the confidentiality. Why then you should tell? I mean, you do not, if you go to repair your car, you are not asking what tools are you using to get my car going. If they bought some new equipment that lets them do it 5 times faster, then just their equipment, their investment. And why you should tell it? You, of course, later someone can come to you and tell that if you can give me discount, then you can sort of adjust. But why do you have to tell it at the first place? And this can even scare the client if they are not mature enough. So why, as long as it is not agreed that you should not use, as long as you keep the confidentiality, then why you should tell?
Thank you for the question. First of all, some clients do care. A lot of your clients in IT industry have in-house translator specialists who actually deal with translation, and the person who hands off tasks, who is dealing with translators. And this type of clients treat covert MT usage like a cheating, actually. And second thing, we think that some clients need to have 2 options. Some of our clients agree to use MT on some technical projects and want to use human translation on other projects, and they know the difference in price and in process. We are trying to give them an option, but for new general client who really don't care, what will change if you tell them what you are using, if they don't care? Well, then you need to talk, to negotiate. It's important.
The problem is that, first of all, Fedor has kind of outlined all the scenarios. If you do not say anything, and even assuming you provide the same quality, there is a problem. At a certain moment in time, the client, who's a suspicious one, assumes that you are not using MT. Then they learn you are, and the client is approached by another vendor who suggests a 30% discount. And that's exactly a real ethical problem that you'll have. So the second thing, well, I mean, it's a very philosophical consideration. But generally, if you want to establish a long-term relationship, I'd highly advise to be very transparent with the client. And it relates not only to the tools you use, but also to the processes and everything. Moreover, Claire emphasized it yesterday. Actually, a serious client, a big client who cares and who cares about the quality of their product, will definitely want to have a kind of an in-depth investigation into your process, tools, approaches. So you should be ready for it. And you should be ready for it for all clients, even for those who do not care, because you never know when they start caring or whether they do care. And I'd rather suggest to have a universal approach that is transparency, honesty, and everything. You will not lose anything. What you are talking about scaring clients off. You will not scare them off because you'll explain, we could use MT. There is a little bit more risk because some errors could still go unnoticed. But the price is lower, the speed is higher. Or if you are aware of that, if you absolutely do not allow it for whatever reason, we do have clients who explicitly prohibit it. We will not use it and we will use human translation, but it will be more expensive and not as fast. And it's their choice. And every person, like you at a canteen, you feel considerably better when you can select what you eat rather than you're given something. In a sense, you feel in control. And that's exactly where the client should be, because the client should be in the comfort zone. The client should not be inconvenienced by your... Yeah, exactly. Because as soon as they are inconvenienced, they start suspecting the worst. As everyone.
I will add just one more sentence.
I would like to repeat our approach to new clients for those who do not care. This is actually a gray zone. You need to explain that during translation, the translator receives suggestions from various sources, including translation memory, term-based, and private MT engines. Your data will be safe, will not be used to train publicly MTs, but only the translator editors decides which suggestion to use, and the result does not suffer under most circumstances. So you are informing, but you are not emphasizing it. You are not telling them, we will use machine translation for your text, and the client will most definitely think, oh, they will run it through Google Translate and send it back to me. I don't need this. Thank you.
Все, спасибо, ребята. Сейчас.